How could you betray the only people who ever truly loved you? I looked up from my stack of contracts, my eyes locking with the piercing gaze of my mother. Linda Thompson, the woman who always seemed impeccably put together, stood there, hands on her hips. It was a question that had haunted me since I discovered the truth. Mom, I began, but the words caught in my throat. I sat back in my chair, frustrated, noting her judgment had always hovered just beneath the surface of our interactions. Claudia, what's going on? Brian's voice cut through the tension, his concerned face peeking into my office. My husband always had a knack for appearing at the wrong moments, but his concern seemed genuine, his love unwavering despite our occasional financial tensions. Nothing, Brian, just another issue at work, I lied, forcing a smile. Brian returned my smile, albeit with a tinge of worry. Okay, well, dinner's ready. I've made your favorite. I joined him at the dining table, where my father, Robert, was already sitting. He had that serene look, the one he always wore when he believed everything was under control. He was the retired CEO of a law firm, after all. Control was his specialty. Brian placed a lovingly prepared lasagna in front of me. Thanks, sweetheart, I said as I met his eyes, but behind them I noticed something different today, a flicker of insecurity. Maybe it was just my imagination. So, how's work, Claudia? Robert asked, cutting into his meal. Busy as ever, I replied, glancing at Brian. He seemed distant, preoccupied. Brian, you've been awfully quiet lately, Robert added, noticing the same thing. Brian looked up, his fork suspended in midair. Just thinking, I suppose, he said, his tone oddly strained. We need to talk. Finally, the suspense was too much. About what? I pressed. I'm leaving you, Claudia. I've found someone else, he stated bluntly, the words hanging in the air like a toxic cloud. What? My heart skipped a beat, the shock pulsating in my ears. Who is she? From across the table, my mother looked down, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. The realization hit me like a truck. Mom? Linda's eyes met mine, filled with a mix of guilt and defiance. Claudia, there's something you need to know. Before she could continue, my father's spoon clattered to his plate. Linda, you can't be serious. I'm very serious, Robert. Brian and we're in love, she confessed. The room fell painfully silent. The only sound was the ticking of the clock. My father's resigned expression hinted at a long-buried truth. Brian reached for my hand, but I pulled away, tears blurring my vision. How long? How long has this been going on? I demanded, my voice cracking. A few months, Brian admitted, his voice trembling. My mother added, Claudia, sometimes these things, they just happen. No, Mom, they don't just happen. You made a choice, I fired back, my chest heaving with betrayal. It's complicated, Brian began, but I stopped him with a glare. You've always been part of our family, Brian. How could you do this? Robert stood up. Enough, we'll talk about this calmly. You knew, didn't you? I asked my father, my voice barely a whisper. Robert sighed heavily, his eyes filled with sorrow. I suspected, but I hoped. I was wrong. There were no words left. My heart broke into pieces as I watched the people I trusted most reveal their true colors. In that moment, my seemingly perfect life shattered, and nothing would ever be the same. The next few days after Brian's announcement were a blur. My father's words echoed in my mind as I went through the motions, trying to pretend everything was normal. But nothing was normal anymore. The betrayal cut deep. One evening, as we sat down for dinner at my parents' house, I felt the tension in the air. I forced myself to keep my emotions in check, determined not to make a scene. Halfway through the meal, Brian cleared his throat. I think it's time we told the truth, he said, looking at my mother. My heart sank. What truth? I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. Brian hesitated before finally speaking. Claudia, I've decided to file for divorce. And well, your mother and we're going to be together. My chest tightened. I could hardly breathe. You can't be serious, I whispered, staring at my husband and my mother sitting side by side, their faces brimming with resolve. Linda shot me an apologetic look. Claudia, please understand, she started, her voice gentle yet firm. This isn't about you. Isn't about me, I echoed incredulously. Mom, you're tearing our family apart. Robert slammed his fork down, the noise startling us all. Linda, after everything we've been through, and you, Brian, we brought you into our lives like you were one of our own. Brian looked down, unable to meet my father's eyes. It wasn't planned, Robert, it just happened. Nothing just happens, Robert said coldly. You made a choice, both of you. Linda's voice wavered. I thought you of all people would understand, Robert. Remember Kristen? Robert's face turned ashen at the mention of Kristen, a name I hadn't heard in years. That's different, Linda. She was a mistake, not a betrayal. What a tangled web we weave, Brian muttered softly, his face twisted with regret. I stood up, unable to take it anymore. You both disgust me. I need some air. I hurried out of the house, the cool evening air hitting my flushed face. Jessica, my best friend, found me sitting on the porch steps later. She sat down beside me, her presence a comforting anchor. I heard through the grapevine. Are you okay? No, Jess, I'm not okay. My mom and Brian, She wrapped an arm around my shoulders. I'm so sorry, Claudia. What they did is unforgivable. I swallowed hard. I don't understand how long they've been deceiving me, Jess. My whole life feels like a lie. We'll get through this together, she assured me. And remember, you're not alone. Taking a deep breath, I stood up. I need to face them. I need to know how deep this betrayal goes. Jessica nodded, standing by my side. I'm right here with you. We walked back inside, ready to confront the betrayal head-on. Brian, I demanded, my voice steady and cold. How long has this been going on? He shifted uncomfortably. A few months. We didn't mean for it to happen this way. Robert's voice cut in, sharp and authoritative. Claudia, we'll figure this out. For now, let's get through dinner without any more drama. Drama? I scoffed, incredulous. Our lives are falling apart, and you want calm? Fine, I'll give you calm, I said, forcing myself to sit back down, determined to hold the facade, at least until after dinner. But inside, the storm raged on. And I knew this was just the beginning. The days that followed were marked by awkward silence and heavy tension. The once cozy family home now felt like a battlefield, each meal a minefield of unspoken words. One particularly tense evening, as we all sat in the living room, Brian finally broke the silence. Claudia, I've decided it's time to move out. Linda and I need to start fresh. My father, Robert, sat in his armchair, face impassive. And where do you plan on going? He asked, his voice tightly controlled. We found a place, Brian replied, avoiding everyone's eyes. It's not far from here. I can't believe this is happening, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mom, you're really going with him? Linda looked pained but resolute. Claudia, Brian and I, we love each other. This is the only way. Love? My voice was icy. You call this love? It's betrayal, plain and simple. Brian shifted uncomfortably. It's not like we planned it, Claudia. It just evolved. Robert leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. You've always been like a son to me, Brian. This is how you repay us? Brian had the decency to look ashamed. I'm sorry, Robert, but feelings change. Linda added softly, and so do relationships. I can't even look at you two right now, I muttered, getting up. I needed to escape, to breathe. I went outside, and Jessica, ever the loyal friend, was waiting. How are you holding up? She asked gently. Barely, I admitted, hugging myself against the evening chill. Jessica's eyes flashed with anger. They're unbelievable. Do they really think they can just waltz out and start fresh? I don't know, I sighed. But one thing's for sure. This isn't over. Back inside, I found Brian and Linda packing up some of their things. Leaving already? I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Brian looked up, guilt etched across his features. Claudia, this isn't easy for us either. Really? Because it seems awfully convenient for you two. Linda placed a hand on my arm. We'll make sure you're taken care of, Claudia. I jerked my arm away. I don't need your charity, Mom. What I needed was your loyalty. Robert stood up, his face pale but his voice steady. Let them go, Claudia. Sometimes the best revenge is letting people think they've gotten their way. I stared at my father, confused by his calm. Dad, I don't understand. We'll talk. Just us, he said, guiding me to the kitchen. Sometimes plans need to be made in secret. His words were cryptic, but I trusted him, and deep down I knew he had a plan. You know about Kristen, right? He began once we were alone. I nodded, having heard whispers over the years. Yes, but what does she have to do with this? Betrayals have a way of coming full circle, he said, eyes gleaming with a hidden resolve. Linda will soon find out that the grass isn't always greener. Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. Brian and Linda officially moved out, and I focused on keeping my emotions in check, drawing strength from my father's quiet determination. I could see the strain in his health, but he remained resolute. In a moment of candor, he told me, "Claudia, sometimes the best revenge is engineered with patience. Let them believe they've won. The truth has a way of surfacing." I nodded, understanding that our time to strike would come. For now, it was about playing the long game and preparing for the moment when those who wronged us would face the consequences of their actions. And so, amidst the fallout of betrayal, a plan started to form, a plan that would ensure Brian and Linda would regret ever thinking they could deceive us and escape unscathed. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of calm and hidden turmoil. Every time I saw Brian or my mother, I felt the sting of betrayal afresh, but I had my father's cryptic assurances to hold on to. One evening, after yet another tense dinner, Robert motioned for me to join him in his study. I closed the door behind us and he began speaking quietly. "Claudia, do you trust me?" he asked, his eyes steady on mine. "Of course, Dad. Always." He handed me a thick envelope. "You need to go through these documents. Carefully. These are our plans." I opened the envelope and scanned the contents. Legal documents, financial statements, and a revised will. My eyes widened. "Dad, what is all this?" "It's leverage, Claudia. Your mother thinks she's won, but she doesn't know what's coming." I looked up at him. "What are you planning, Dad?" Robert sighed deeply, a hint of weariness crossing his features. "Linda and Brian will be disinherited. You'll have control of all the assets, but it's essential that we play this carefully." I digested his words, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. "I understand." "Sometimes revenge is not about immediate action," he continued. "It's about timing and patience." "I'll do whatever it takes," I promised. Robert nodded, a look of satisfaction on his face. "Good. Now about the public facade. Keep things civil. They need to believe we're dealing with this peacefully." Over the next few weeks, I used every ounce of my lawyer training to mask my true feelings and play along. Brian and Linda got comfortable in their new lives, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing. One night, during a rare visit from Linda, Dad and I decided it was time to test the waters. At dinner, Robert casually mentioned, "I've been thinking of making some changes to my estate planning." Linda looked up from her plate, curiosity piqued. "What kind of changes?" "Just revisiting the will, ensuring Claudia's future is secure," he said smoothly, gauging her reaction. Her face remained neutral, but I could see the wheels turning. "That sounds reasonable." Silence stretched uncomfortably before Brian chimed in. "Let's not make this dinner too gloomy, okay?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Right, let's enjoy the meal." As dinner wound down, Robert pulled me aside. "See? They're already considering their next moves. Keep playing your part." The next day, we had a frank discussion. Robert's health was declining faster than I realized. "I don't have much time left, Claudia." Tears welled in my eyes, but I forced them back. "Don't talk like that, Dad." "Listen to me," he said, his voice firmer. "You need to be strong. When the time comes, take control. Don't let their betrayal define your life." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I will, I promise." "I've arranged everything," he continued. "Mark Johnson, our lawyer, knows the plans. Trust him." In the days that followed, we had more candid conversations, often reminiscing about happier times and laying down the intricate layers of our plan. We spent as much time together as possible, savoring every moment. One evening, as we sat watching an old movie, Robert took my hand. "Remember, Claudia, sometimes the best revenge is letting them think they've won. For now." When Robert passed away shortly after our conversation, the grief was almost unbearable. But through the haze of loss, I knew what needed to be done. At the funeral, Linda and Brian had the gall to put on sympathetic faces. But behind those masks, I saw their greed. They believed they were about to reap their rewards. Little did they know, justice was on its way, crafted with meticulous care by my father and waiting to be unveiled. The coming battle was inevitable, and I was ready. The day of my father's funeral was somber, filled with tight handshakes and whispered condolences. Yet, underneath my grief, a cold resolve kept me going. I knew what was coming, and it gave me the strength to face Brian and Linda. As we returned home after the service, Mark Johnson, our family lawyer and longtime friend, was already waiting. "Claudia," he greeted me with a somber nod, "it's time to read the will." Linda and Brian joined us in the study, their expressions a mix of anticipation and false empathy. Mark cleared his throat and began. Robert wanted today to be about closure and clarity. Brian shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Linda clasped her hands tightly, her eyes fixed on Mark. As per Robert's wishes, the estate will be divided accordingly, Mark continued, handing out copies of the will. I watched carefully as they scanned the document, their faces slowly morphing from anticipation to confusion, then horror. Linda was the first to speak, her voice quivering. This can't be right. There must be a mistake. Mark looked her squarely in the eye. There is no mistake. Robert has disinherited you completely, Linda. Brian's knuckles went white around the paper. What about me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mark turned to him. Brian, all marital assets are to be returned to Claudia. You'll be left with nothing. Linda seethed, turning to me. You did this. You convinced him. I met her gaze coolly. This was his will, Mom. He saw through your deceit. Brian finally found his voice. You can't do this to us, Claudia. We deserve something. I stepped forward, my voice cutting through the tension. You deserve what you get, Brian. After everything you've both done, this is justice. Tears welled up in Linda's eyes, her voice trembling. After all these years, this is how you repay me, Claudia. I felt a pang of sorrow but held firm. No, Mom, this is how you repaid us, all those times you chose betrayal over loyalty. Mark finished reading the will, explaining, Claudia will have full control of all assets, including the firm. Linda's face was a portrait of devastation. And what are we supposed to do now? She demanded. Mark interjected, his tone measured. Robert did set aside a trust fund, but it comes with conditions. Brian looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. What conditions? You must both work menial jobs for a year and live in modest conditions. Only after that can you access the funds. The room fell into stunned silence. Linda and Brian's faces were masks of disbelief and fury. Finally, Brian spat out, This is insane. We'll fight this. Mark remained calm. You can try, but these are ironclad terms. Robert ensured there would be no loopholes. I looked at the two of them. You wanted to start fresh? Now, you'll get to see what that really means. Linda's voice was barely audible. How could you, Claudia? It's what Dad wanted, I replied, steel in my voice. He believed in justice. So do I. Brian and Linda left the house, their future uncertain and bleak. I watched them go, knowing that their punishment had only just begun. The tables had turned, and they would now experience the consequences of their actions. As Mark and I stood in silence, he finally spoke. You did well, Claudia. Your father would be proud. I nodded, feeling the weight of the day settle in. Thank you, Mark. Now it's time to rebuild. And with that, I turned to face the path ahead, ready to embrace the challenges and new beginnings that lay before me. The fallout from the will's reading was swift. Brian and Linda lingered in the periphery of my life, desperately clinging to any hope of reversing their fate. But I was prepared. They would learn that actions have consequences. One morning, as I entered the office, Rebecca, my colleague, intercepted me. Claudia, you won't believe this, she said, her voice tinged with excitement. Brian just lost his job. I raised an eyebrow. Already? Rebecca nodded. Word spread fast about his involvement with Linda. The company couldn't risk the scandal. I felt a momentary flicker of pity, but pushed it aside. Good, he made his bed. Jessica joined us, full of news. Apparently, Linda tried to access some of Robert's accounts, all of them locked. They're truly left with nothing. I sighed, feeling the weight of satisfied justice. They deserve every bit of it. Later that day, I received a call from Linda. Her voice was a mix of desperation and anger. Claudia, how could you let this happen? We have nothing. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my voice steady. You brought this on yourself, Mom. You and Brian decided to betray us. It was a mistake, she pleaded, her tone softening. Brian and we didn't mean for it to end like this. A mistake repeated over months, I replied coldly. You both made your choices. Brian made a similar call that evening, his tone arrogant, despite his situation. Claudia, let's be reasonable. There must be something we can work out. You've lost everything because of your actions, I retorted. Deal with the consequences. A few days later, I attended a meeting with Mark Johnson to discuss the next steps. As we wrapped up, he handed me a folder. These are the documents to garnish Brian's wages. Are you sure you want to proceed? I nodded firmly. Execute every one of them. Within weeks, Brian's financial situation deteriorated rapidly. His wages were garnished, leaving him unable to meet even basic needs. Linda, used to a life of luxury, struggled with the new reality. One afternoon, Brian stormed into my office, cheeks flushed with anger. "Claudia," he fumed, "this has to end. We can't live like this." I looked at him calmly. "You should have thought about that before betraying us." He slammed his fist on the desk. "You were supposed to be my wife. Have some compassion." "Compassion?" I asked, incredulous. "Where was your compassion when you and my mother decided to deceive us?" Before he could respond, Jessica walked in. "Everything okay in here?" Brian shot her a furious glance before storming out, leaving a tense silence in his wake. Jessica looked at me, concerned. "You all right?" I nodded. "Just the consequences of his actions catching up to him." Linda's demise followed closely. Her social circles abandoned her, unwilling to be associated with her disgrace. Financial ruin forced her to sell off her few remaining assets, and she moved into a modest apartment far from the upscale life she once knew. I met with Mark again, this time to discuss the final phase. "The assets have been legally transferred," he confirmed. "They truly have nothing left." "That's just the beginning," I replied. "It's time they learned humility." In a dramatic showdown, Mark and I revealed the full extent of our legal victories to Linda and Brian. Their faces were masks of disbelief and desperation. "I hope you two find happiness in poverty," I said icily, "because that's all you have left." As they walked away, I felt a sense of closure. My father's strategy had worked. Brian and Linda were left to face the harsh reality they had created, while I stepped into a new chapter, ready to rebuild my life from the ruins of their betrayal. Brian and Linda had reached rock bottom. I heard from mutual acquaintances that they were scraping by, taking whatever jobs they could find. Their glamorous lifestyle had crumbled into nothing more than a struggle for basic survival. One afternoon, I received a call from Brian. It started off calm, but quickly turned desperate. "Claudia, it's Brian. We need to talk." I could almost hear the desperation in his voice. "About what?" "You made your choices." "Please, we're struggling. Linda's health is declining. Surely there's something you can do." A part of me felt a pang of sorrow, but I strengthened my resolve. "Meet me in the office tomorrow." The next day, Brian and Linda shuffled into my office. They looked worn, their faces lined with troubles. Linda's once glamorous aura was now overshadowed by tired eyes and a frail frame. Brian broke the silence first. "Claudia, we know we messed up, but Linda's sick. We can't make ends meet." I leaned back in my chair, allowing a moment of silence to build tension. "You knew the terms, Brian. Dad was very clear." Linda's voice was shaky. "Claudia, you've always been a good daughter. Can't you see we're suffering?" I stood up, walking over to the window, looking out but not really seeing anything. I took a deep breath and turned back to face them. "There is one thing." Their eyes lit up with hope. "What?" "My father set aside a trust fund," I began slowly, "but accessing it comes with conditions." Brian's face twisted into a mix of hope and suspicion. "What conditions?" "You both need to show you can live a modest life. We work menial jobs. Prove you understand the value of hard work for a year. Only then will you have access to the funds." Linda looked like she might faint. "A year? We can't last that long, Claudia." I met her desperate gaze, my voice calm but firm. "Those are the terms. Take it or leave it." Brian clenched his fists, his face a mask of frustration. "This is humiliating." I shrugged. "It's your only way out. Maybe you'll learn something valuable." They left, a flicker of hope in their defeated steps, knowing they had no choice but to comply. Over the next few months, I checked in on their progress, ensuring they met every stipulation. I watched from a distance as they struggled through menial jobs and budgeted their modest income. It was a far cry from the life they once knew, and it seemed every day humbled them further. One evening, as I sat in the living room with Jessica, she commented on their plight. "They almost look like different people now." I nodded. They needed this reality check. Maybe they'll finally understand the weight of their actions. A year passed, and Brian and Linda met every requirement. They earned their right to access the trust fund, but it was clear the experience had changed them. They were humbled, broken down by the harshness of a life they never thought they'd live. At the final meeting, as Mark handed them the trust fund papers, Brian looked at me with an emotion I hadn't expected. Gratitude. "Thank you, Claudia. We didn't deserve it, but thank you." Linda echoed his sentiment, a far cry from the proud woman she once was. We'll make better choices from now on. See that you do, I replied, feeling a sense of closure. This is your second chance. Don't waste it. As they left, I felt a strange sense of peace. The storm had passed, leaving a calm in its wake. I had avenged my father's memory and found my own closure. Now it was time for me to rebuild, to focus on my own future, and let go of the past. I turned to Jessica, who had been watching silently. Ready for a new beginning, she smiled, her support unwavering. Absolutely. With that, I stepped forward into a new chapter, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead, knowing I was stronger than ever. The dust had finally settled. Life had returned to a semblance of normalcy, though it was a new normal. The past year had been grueling, but in its wake it left clarity and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. In my father's old firm, now under my leadership, I focused on restoring its luster and expanding its reach. My days were filled with strategic meetings and legal battles, each victory a tribute to my dad's legacy. Claudia, your 2 p.m. is here, Rebecca's voice crackled over the intercom. Send them in, I said, straightening my desk. Jessica strode in, holding a thick portfolio. Ready for the presentation? Absolutely, I responded, feeling that familiar spark of excitement. We'd been working on a major acquisition, one that would catapult the firm into a new league. We spent the next hour hashing out details, fine-tuning our strategy. As the meeting concluded, Jessica leaned back, a satisfied grin on her face. We've got this, Claudia. Your dad would have been proud. I nodded, feeling a warm glow. Thanks, Jess. We've worked hard for this. Later that day, I visited my father's grave, needing a moment of quiet reflection. As I stood there, the breeze rustling the leaves, I felt a sense of peace. We did it, Dad. We honored your legacy. Driving back home, I felt a sense of closure. The year of turmoil had finally ended, and I was ready to embrace the future. That evening, while having dinner with Jessica and a few close friends, the conversation turned to the past year's events. How are Brian and Linda doing? Someone asked. Jessica was quick to answer. They're managing, but they've really changed. I think they've finally learned their lesson. People rarely do, I said, sipping my wine, but maybe they've been humbled enough to appreciate the second chance. Rebecca chimed in. You've been incredibly strong through all of this, Claudia. Not many would have handled it like you did. I smiled, grateful for the support. Thanks, everyone. It wasn't easy, but I'm glad it's over. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity and growth. The acquisition went through successfully, and the firm's reputation soared. My days were busy but fulfilling, each challenge a testament to my resilience. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Brian. His voice was hesitant. Claudia, it's Brian. I just wanted to say thank you for everything. I paused, surprised by the call. You're welcome, Brian. I hope you and Mom are doing better. We are. We're rebuilding, he admitted, and it's all thanks to you. We'd love to meet sometime, if you're open to it. I considered his offer for a moment. Maybe one day, Brian. For now, let's keep focusing on moving forward. Understood, he said, a hint of relief in his voice. Take care, Claudia. As I hung up, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but it was a step towards healing. Later that evening, I met Jessica for a walk by the river. We talked about the future and the exciting projects lined up for the firm. I think we're ready for a new chapter, Jessica said, smiling. Absolutely, I replied, watching the sunset over the water. We're just getting started. Healing was a process, and though scars remained, I knew I was stronger for it. With my father's legacy in my hands and a bright future ahead, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Life had thrown its worst at me, but I'd come out the other side, ready to face whatever came next. As the city lights flickered to life around us, I felt a surge of optimism. This was my journey, and it was far from over. Together with my friends and my renewed sense of self, I was ready to embrace the future, one step at a time.